So I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about travel reimbursements. It's a big topic. I could talk to you all day about it, but we're going to focus on some high-level policies and payment options. Before we get into all of that, I just wanted to introduce my office. Maybe you've heard of the Travel Accounting Office, but maybe you're not sure what we do. Our office reviews all the university travel expenses to make sure they're in compliance. And then we also process all travel payments and reimbursements. So that's both invoices via purchase order and reimbursements to individuals through Express. When we're fully staffed, our office has 8 people. We've got our manager, Frank-Marc Cassot, and myself. And then we have dedicated teams. We have a team for the T&E card administration. We have a team that works on those purchase orders, so invoices payable to vendors. And we have a team that works on reimbursements through Express. These phone numbers will reach the help desks directly. So if you know you have a question about it, you can also always reach us through the general office email, travelacct@finance.ucla.edu, and we'll triage from there, get it to the right team. And don't worry about taking down all of these phones and emails. I've given this presentation to Claudia so she can make this available to you afterwards. Okay, so what do we mean by we make sure things are within compliance? We have different levels of policies and compliance. The first level is at the UC level. This is the G28 policy that's written by the Office of the President, and it applies to all of the UC campuses. This is the minimum that every campus needs to adhere to. And then each campus can set their own guidelines. So what we've done is we've interpreted some of the policies from G28 to make them specific for our users or answer questions that were maybe a little bit vague. These campus guidelines for UCLA are posted on the travel website. And then from there, departments can be more restrictive than either UC or campus policy. They may set internal policies or procedures specific to their department, just as long as it is not less restrictive than any of the higher levels of the policy hierarchy. So I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about some of the most basic travel expenses. Of course, the UC policy and the UCLA guidelines can get into much more detail, but in general, when we're talking about airfare, UCLA will pay for economy or coach fares. And we ask that you arrange this as far in advance as possible so you can obtain the best price. A UCLA campus, so this is a campus guideline, we will allow for seat selection fees, extra legroom, as long as that ticket is still in the economy cabin. One great feature we have at UCLA is direct billing that's offered through the UC Travel Center. Diana is going to talk to you about that in a little bit. Direct billing basically means you can arrange to travel through her office and the payment will be charged to your department, no out-of-pocket cost to your traveler. So this is a wonderful feature that we have available to us here. Of course, travelers can pay for airfare on their own. In that case, they would be reimbursed after the trip is over. And in those cases, the traveler is the one who's responsible for making sure that they're within compliance. So that means that they make sure that they get the appropriate receipts and they're aware of any policies about airfare. The receipt we're looking for airfare is something that shows the name, the itinerary, the class of service, the price breakdown, and how the ticket was paid for. So if someone pays out of pocket, they need to provide a receipt having all of those details. If you're talking about international airfare, there are some extra things that might apply. So one of the UCLA campus guidelines is if a trip is going to be longer than a week to an international destination, and more than half of that trip is going to be for personal travel, UCLA will prorate that airfare expense. So say, for example, you went internationally for 10 days, 3 of those were for business and 7 were for personal, UCLA would reimburse 30% of the cost. Another thing to watch out for international trips is the Fly America Act. Now, this only applies if you're using a federal funding source, but if you're traveling between the US and a foreign location and paying for it with a federal fund, the Fly America Act says you have to ticket on a US flag carrier. So airlines like United, American, Delta, something like that. There's something called the Open Skies Agreement that expands the list of available airlines. So if you're flying to a particular country and their flag carrier is used, that may be allowable from the Open Skies Agreement. I talk about these things to remind you that direct billing is a great option. When you do direct billing and you book through the UC Travel Center, a UCLA employee is a travel agent and they know all of these policies and they will make sure that everything is in compliance. But if you book on your own, which you certainly are allowed to do, you become the one who's responsible for making sure that you adhere to these. So it can be a lot to remember, especially if you're dealing with international travel. Okay, if you rent a car, UC policy is generally for intermediate sized vehicles or smaller, and we do allow for GPS or navigation equipment. Other optional add-ons or upgrades are generally not allowable, right? The satellite radio, the child car seat, those are not business expenses. Optional insurance is generally not reimbursable because we have negotiated contract rates with several rental car vendors. Those rental car rates include insurance. And to get those, the reservation must be made through the UC Travel Center. When submitting reimbursement for a rental car, the final itemized receipt is always required. This can be tricky. Sometimes people turn in their reservation confirmation or an estimate. That's not the final receipt. We're looking for the one after the car is returned. And it should have a breakdown of everything that's included in the cost. When you rent a car, you're eligible to claim fuel expenses. We do ask that you be good stewards of the university's funds and refuel at a gas station where possible, right? We have probably seen where if you buy the gas from the rental car vendor directly, it can be very overpriced. So whenever possible, travelers are expected to use gas stations for the fuel. If you drive your own car, you'd be eligible to claim mileage reimbursement. Refer to the G28 policy or the travel website for the current mileage rate. It usually changes annually. No receipts are required by UC policy or UCLA campus guidelines, but remember, departments can be more restrictive. I have seen a lot of departments require a mileage log or a Google Maps printout to verify the mileage. You always want to check what your department rules are. Other kinds of ground transportation and public transport, we ask that travelers seek the most economical option. This comes up maybe most frequently with ride shares. There's all different kinds of Ubers you can select. We would ask that you not select the luxury Uber. I think it's generally Uber X or lower. If you tip, tips should not exceed 20% of the total, and a receipt would be required for any ground transportation over $75. If you're traveling within the continental United States, UC policy refers to that as domestic travel. So for lodging expenses, domestic travel, you would claim your actual expense. The room rate should not exceed $275 per night. Now that's just the room rate, that's before any taxes or fees. So the total may be more than that, but the room rate should be $275 or less. We understand there are times you're not able to find a hotel for $275 or less. In those cases, we're expecting a comparison quote made at the time of booking to show that the most economical option was chosen. Receipts are always required for lodging, and those receipts have to be itemized, which means it shows the breakdown of room rate, taxes, and any other expenses. And the receipt needs to reflect a payment or a $0 balance due. If you have a T&E card and you pay for a lodging deposit on that card, you can submit the lodging deposit in the express system before the trip. Right? Maybe you booked the lodging 2 months in advance. We don't want you getting any late fees. So submit that lodging deposit right away. But that's only with the T&E card, not for personal cards. And then reimbursement is not allowed for travel packages. We don't see this too much anymore. I think the word has gotten out on that, but travel packages are where you combine expenses. Maybe the airfare and lodging is all rolled into one. We cannot reimburse for that. We need to see a breakdown of how much for each type of expense. For meals and incidental expenses, you'll see this term meals and IE. The IE stands for incidental expenses, and that's really just tips for services. So think if you went to a restaurant and then you paid a gratuity, that's your meals and incidentals. For domestic travel, that's within the continental US, travelers should claim their actual meals and IE. Travelers must be on travel status for 24 hours or stay overnight to be eligible to claim meals. And those meals are limited to a maximum of $62 per day. The 62 is not a per diem, it's actual cost up to a maximum of 62. We recommend that travelers get receipts and turn them in to whoever's processing your expense reports in order to get your actual cost, but you don't need to keep those receipts on file after you submit your expense report. It can be a red flag if travelers or departments consistently claim the maximum. So they're always claiming 62 per day. So that may be a red flag for internal audit. But we just, if you are claiming the maximum, we ask that you add a quick comment to say actual cost exceeded the limits. Okay, so what do we do when we travel outside of the continental US? Anything outside of the continental US is considered foreign travel. So it's a little bit weird the way they define it as continental US and outside the continental US. So technically Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, they all fall under these foreign travel rules. For foreign travel, meals and lodging are reimbursed based on per diem rates. Those rates are set by the US Department of State. These are limited to expenses actually incurred up to the maximum. So the same idea as the 62, there is a set rate, but we would like you to claim your actual expense up to the maximum. The way you do that in the reimbursement system is by entering a per diem claim. And if you know that the actual cost is less than what it loads in at, then we ask that you adjust it down. So maybe the per diem rate loads in at a total of $500, but you know actual cost was only $425. You would adjust it down by that $75. Receipts are not required for foreign per diem claims, but for the same reasons we talked about before, it's suggested that you maintain receipts if you are claiming the maximum. And again, when the maximum is claimed consistently, it can be a red flag for audit. And we ask that you make that comment that actual cost exceeded the per diem. So how do you pay for all this stuff? There's lots of options available as a UCLA employee. The first that I mentioned was direct billing, and that's done through Diana's office, the UC Travel Center. Right now, direct billing is available for airfare and hotel, and it does require an approved request. You may be familiar with a PTA, a pre-trip authorization from the legacy system. In the new system, this is replaced by an approved express request. Another option is the travel and entertainment card. This is an individual charge card. All active UCLA employees are eligible for a T&E card. And if you have someone who's planning to travel for UC Business, we recommend that you get them a card so they're ready to use it when that trip comes up. The way it works is you use the card, those transactions load into your Express account, you attach those transactions to an expense report, and UCLA will pay the bank directly. So again, no out-of-pocket cost if you use a T&E card. Another option might be an invoice, so to pay something via purchase order in brew and buy. This is not as common for travel expenses, but it could work for hotels if a hotel accepts a purchase order. Maybe the most common we see is group hotels. So you set something up in advance to pay for a block of rooms. Of course, you can use cash personal card and you would be reimbursed after completion of the trip. Again, that's through the express reimbursement system. And another option that may be available is a cash advance. Let me tell you a little bit about how that works. Cash advances are for exceptional circumstances only, and they're reviewed on a case-by-case basis. Usually they are for special types of trips like a student group that's traveling, long-term travel that's more than 30 days, or travel to a remote location or somewhere where credit cards are not accepted easily. The cash advance requires pre-approval from travel accounting. In order to get pre-approval, we need to see a justification of why an advance is needed and an estimated budget. So you say, I need $5,000 and this is what I plan to spend it on. A travel advance budget can include some limited non-travel expenses that would be incurred on site. Like maybe you need to go buy some field supplies or pay for permits or hire some day laborers. Those can be included in a cash advance. But a cash advance budget can never include airfare because that can be direct billed, conference registration fees because those can be paid by purchase order, salaries for skilled trades. So in those cases, we don't want our UCLA employees paying cash as a salary. We would like to work with a local entity to hire those skilled tradesmen and pay them directly from the university. And we also shouldn't use cash advances to pay for travel expenses for other UCLA employees. Each employee is expected to incur their own expenses. Cash advances are never done through Express. Everything is done in brew and buy. And these are issued via direct deposit. And we can only do that for active employees, so not for students. The advance can be issued up to 7 days before the departure and needs to be reconciled within 45 days after the trip ends. And the way the reconciliation works is all the expenses are accounted for, and then any unused funds are returned.
Wendy, we have sorry to interrupt. There was a couple of questions in the chat. Maybe we could just, unless you want to wait till the end, or we could just address it.
I would like to wait for the end of the presentation.
Okay. All right.
Will do. Thanks, Claudia. So I mentioned group travel. Group travel is when a group obviously is traveling together. But like I said, employees, if they're traveling as a group, each employee should pay for their own expenses. But if a group is for students, one person would be designated the group leader. Hopefully that would be an employee as the leader. And we suggest that you direct bill whatever you can, pay for certain items that you can via purchase order, but then contact us if you need help with figuring out how to pay for the other expenses. Like I said, we may be able to issue an advance to the group leader, and there may even be some other options that the T&E card administrator has, such as a ghost card. Okay, so the trip is over and it's time to submit for reimbursement. How does that work? Remember, we've got different levels of hierarchy. So the UC policy says that reimbursements should be submitted within 45 days. And the campus guideline echoes that. And the way we try to enforce that is saying that if things are submitted more than 45 days late, they may be taxable to the employee. Now, don't worry, we don't tax every time something is more than 45 days late. There has to be an exceptional reason why it's very late. But in general, we would like things submitted to us within 45 days so that we can adhere to the campus, or I'm sorry, to the UC policy. And departments can be more restrictive. You might see your department say, I need it within 20 days so that we have time to review it, approve it, and get it to travel within that 45-day window. The processing timelines, once something gets to our office, is to review that within 5 to 10 business days. So that's for both expense reports and invoices. We always post the reimbursement processing date right there on the Express homepage, so you can see what date we're currently working on. We don't have a place to post the invoice processing date, but we try to stay current with the Express processing date. Two of the most common reasons something might be delayed beyond that 5 to 10 day window would be if there's an insufficient business justification. So you know what your trip is about. The person creating your expense report probably knows what it's about. Your department reviewer probably knows what it's about, but do we know what it's about? If this is pulled by internal or external audit, will they know what it's about? If someone looks at this 5 years down the road, will they understand what it's about? So what we ask you to please write something that addresses the who, what, when, where, and why of the trip or event that makes sense to someone unfamiliar with your department. And then the other thing that can cause delay is missing receipt documentation. So in general, this isn't even that someone doesn't turn in a receipt, it's that they turn in a receipt that they think is correct, but it doesn't have all of the things we need. So like I mentioned, it might be an estimate or a quote instead of a final invoice, or the receipt might show a balance due instead of payment in full. And I know we covered a lot in a short period of time, and there's a lot more to learn out there. If you would like to learn more, a lot of information is on the Express training site. On there, you'll find self-service tutorials about how to use the Express system. So things like, I want to add a delegate, I want to attach a T&E card transaction. Those are all self-service. We also have a training course about travel and entertainment policy that you can sign up for through the Learning Center. And Travel Accounting hosts a monthly Zoom meeting where we usually focus on a topic and then open it up for Q&A. All of those things, you can find links and registration on the travel site. And as always, you can email our office if you need any assistance. So thank you so much. And we will get to those questions in Q&A when Claudia lets us know, but I will turn it back over to her.
Thank you so much. This was great. Let me remove the pin. Let me see what we have. So Tara asked, so we are no longer to book the hotel if it's over 275, but the conference venue?
Yeah, Tara, that's okay. I didn't mention conference. I was kind of gearing this towards field research, but yes, if it's a conference hotel and it's over 275, that's okay.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks.
Okay.
Just indicate that in the expense report if people are traveling and they're staying at a conference hotel and it's $300 or whatever per night, then just indicate that, you know, this was the where the conference was located and you stayed at the conference hotel, and that would help us.
All right, next question was, what is the reimbursement policy if someone travels abroad and has to quarantine unexpectedly due to a positive COVID test result or to meet country guidelines? Can departments reimburse those costs?
Yes, I would say yes.
Okay, so then I have a question, because Tara last time said that COVID and COVID related issues are no longer really an emergency or something. Maybe Tara, you can chime in.
Oh, right. So the reason why I asked is the travel insurance doesn't cover quarantine expenses. So that's why I was asking if departments are allowed to reimburse those costs. They will. The travel insurance will cover it if you get really sick and you're not allowed to leave the country and you're seriously ill and you're hospitalized. But if you test positive and you're just a little bit sick, they're not going to pay for any of those quarantine expenses.
Okay.
Yeah, and so, I mean, first of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Scott Manotlik. I'm a senior director, and travel accounting are report to me. And so, yeah, I mean, it seems only fair that if somebody is traveling on business and then is required to quarantine while they're traveling on business, and it costs them extra money, that's a business expense and the university could reimburse that. Is that the scenario you're asking about, Tara, where they're traveling on business and then have to quarantine during or after the trip?
Yeah, that's correct. That was my primary concern. I guess the secondary emergency concern is if, you know, worst case scenario, they close the borders and then someone's stuck there for a really long time.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't encountered that situation yet, but I guess we'd have to look at those on a case-by-case basis. I mean, I think Diana's going to talk about this, about, you know, making sure that before you travel, before you take the trip, to look at what the requirements of the country are that you're going to, and then also to look at what the requirements of the US are for getting back into the US after, so we don't get stuck. Of course, things can happen, you know, while you're traveling that you can't control. But anyways, I think Diana will talk about those things as well.
All right. Let's get to Tony's questions. He has quite a few. It says, you said we can only get up to intermediate sized vehicles, but what about renting field vehicles, which are often SUVs?
Yeah, so the general policy is up to an intermediate sized vehicle, but if you need a larger vehicle for field research, just explain that in the comment. It should be fine.
Okay, so basically whenever something deviates from the usual, what's usually allowed, and you have a good explanation, it should be possible. That's what I'm understanding? Yes. Okay.
Yep, you're right.
How does the meal expenses work if you're buying groceries for a crew for a week?
Yeah, that one can get a little bit tricky. It kind of depends on, are you buying food to stock a kitchen that everyone takes as their meals? If you're buying food that's going to be served at hosted events, I assume you're talking about the first one for just meals. It would be $62 per person per day. We would enter it slightly differently as probably other, and then again, explain this is groceries for X number of people for X number of days, instead of using their traditional meals and IE approach. But you could contact our office if you need help with that.
Okay, so the next question, I'm not quite understanding, maybe Tony can chime in. It says, I have a T&E department for one department.
T&E card, yeah.
Yeah, I have a
T-
T&E card for one
Oh,
department.
card.
I have a
Okay,
T&E card. I like work in 2 different departments. I have a T&E card for one department because I do administrative stuff for them and take trips and things like that. But my research is usually associated with a different department, you know, and my expenses usually go for that through that department for field work. Can I use the same T&E card? Do I get a different one for each department? Like, how does that work?
Nope, it's one card for each employee. So if you're with 2 different departments, you would use the card for both. I would just make sure that the second department is aware that you have a card and plan to use it for travel.
all right, another question from Tony. How does it work if you are splitting costs, like for lodging?
So on the expense report, there's a place where you allocate the FAU. You can allocate it to as many different FAUs as you need to.
I mean more like, so like on a last trip I was on, I split the cost with another PI at another university. Like we split the cost
Oh,
of
okay.
lodging, right? That's what I mean.
Okay, so you paid for half
Yeah.
and their university paid for half.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you would only claim the half and again, use comments to explain. So maybe my hotel bill is $200, but UCLA is paying 100 and the other university is paying the other half.
Got it. Cool. Thank you.
Okay, here's a very timely question. My research assistants are required to get COVID tests in Costa Rica, and they are pretty pricey, up to $134. Can I reimburse those costs to them from the travel advance?
Hi, Dr. Perry. Joanne's been asking about this. I know she has. I mean, we're still learning about, you know, how to pay for all of this stuff. So I might let Scott chime in here.
Yeah, I mean, this
Yes.
of course, let's see. So would they have incurred that expense but for their trip on business? Are they traveling there, or are they like research assistants that are living there?
So you, just to chime in, you have to take a COVID test before returning to the United States. So wherever you are, you have to pay that price to return to the United States.
Well, and they're required to leave every 90 days because during this COVID phase, instead of having year-long research visas, they're having 90-day visas. And so they need to get 4 COVID tests during the year that they're down there. And yeah, they can be pretty pricey, and they have to charge the way that you sign up for these, they have to charge it to their personal credit card, but they'd like to be reimbursed from the cash advance. The expenses incurred in Costa Rica.
But they're doing it so they could come back to the United States?
No, well, no, it's, well, yes and no. They're required to, they're staying for a year, but they're forced to leave and come back 3 times in the middle of that.
Okay.
And
So, I mean, that's what I'm saying. So it's for them to be able to come back to the United States.
So that they can come back to Costa Rica.
We're paying for their
Or not
travels.
necessarily to go to the US. It's just required by Costa Rican law to leave for 72 hours and come back because of the current way they're handling researcher visas.
Oh,
So it's not like they want to go to another country. They're just because they have to come back and finish their work, right?
and they're citizens of another country or something, and so they're required to leave in order for immigration.
Yeah,
something.
that's right. Mm-hmm. It's quirky.
And yeah, I guess we could think about that. Is it like sort of their own personal immigration reasons? I guess it's a business trip. Are we for their trips back and forth?
They have to, by law, they have to leave for 74 hours every 90 days.
Yeah, and I'm saying we're paying for those trips. I'm saying the UCLA.
Well, no, I mean, when I wrote this grant proposal, I budgeted 1 round trip ticket for them because I didn't know they were going to have to leave. And now, of course, they're covering the middle 3 flights, but I'm covering the equivalent of 1 round trip. But that's another good question. I was hoping I would I'll submit it, probably the most pricey of the tickets that they had to do in order to do research with me of those round trip tickets.
Do do you think this is all being paid for by a grant, right? Federal grant? So do
That's
you
right.
think the grant would is this allowable under the grant? I mean, is that, or is it just based on UC policy that it would be allowable under the grant? I mean, is there some?
I think it would be allowable under the grant. I'm pretty sure I asked at some point my grant administrator at NSF. I mean, the grant started before COVID, but they are being pretty flexible about COVID issues. So
Right, yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's fine with NSF.
If you could maybe just send us something that says that this would be, that somebody said this would be allowable under the grant, that would help us.
Yeah, as I recall, I mean, we started this dialogue many, many weeks ago, right? And we just haven't quite resolved it. And I'm pretty sure we did get approval from NSF, and they were just saying, yes, you can reallocate, within this framework of a giant pot of money that was a subset of the budget. And it was just more a question of how to do the reimbursement, whether each person had to reimburse individually. And now I'm realizing that some of these is too late because for them to do the independent reimbursement, because it would be more than 45 days after they had the test, but it's a multi-month travel advance. So it seems to me it's cleaner to do it as part of the travel advance. And then I guess I would submit their receipts, and maybe you'd want a receipt that says, then I gave them the money from the travel advance to cover that. Or something like that.
Right. Yeah, and if you have something you can send to Minnie that shows that this would, or somebody said that this was okay under the grant, I think it could be paid under the travel advance.